My girlfriend's parents had a test that every boyfriend had to pass before proposing. I was staring at the photographs spread across the detective's desk when I realized I had been living inside someone else's experiment for 18 months. Detective Ramirez, 23 years with the Metropolitan Police Department, slid another manila folder toward me with 2 fingers like he was moving a piece on a chessboard. He didn't look at me when he said it. Mr. Langford, I need you to understand that what they did to you meets the legal definition of psychological torture in 4 different statutes. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to put them flat on the table to make them stop. The photographs showed my apartment, my bedroom, my bathroom, angles I had never seen before because I had never installed cameras in those places. Someone else had. Rebecca told me about the test on our 6-month anniversary. We were sitting in her parents' backyard in that planned community where every house looked like it cost more than I would make in a decade. Her father was grilling steaks that probably cost more per pound than my rent. Her mother was arranging flowers in a crystal vase that caught the late afternoon sun. Everything was perfect in that way that made my teeth ache. Rebecca took my hand and said her parents wanted to talk to me about something important. She said it was just a family thing and I shouldn't worry. She said every serious boyfriend went through it and everyone came out fine on the other side. I should have asked what happened to the ones who didn't come out fine. I should have asked a lot of things. Her father's name was Douglas Whitmore, and he had made his fortune in private security consulting. Her mother was Diane, and she had been a clinical psychologist before she retired to focus on philanthropic work. They both had the kind of smiles that looked expensive, like they had been professionally installed. Douglas started the conversation by telling me how much they appreciated the way I treated their daughter. He said Rebecca seemed happier than she had been in years. Diane nodded along and mentioned that Rebecca had spoken about me constantly, and they could tell I was special. Then Douglas leaned back in his chair, and his smile changed into something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He said that because I was special, because Rebecca clearly saw a future with me, they wanted to make sure I understood what joining their family really meant. The test, Douglas explained, was simple in concept, but rigorous in execution. If I intended to propose to Rebecca, I needed to demonstrate that I could handle the pressures and responsibilities that came with being part of their family. He said their family operated on principles of excellence, discretion, and absolute trust. Anyone who married into the Whitmore family needed to prove they embodied those same principles. The test would take place over the next year. During that time, I would be evaluated on various aspects of my character, judgment, and loyalty. Douglas said the evaluation would be discreet, and I wouldn't always know when I was being assessed. He said this was necessary to see how I behaved when I thought no one was watching. That should have been the moment I stood up and walked away. Instead, I looked at Rebecca and she was smiling at me with so much love and confidence that I felt my concerns dissolve. She believed in me. She wanted me to do this, so I said yes. The first 3 months were unremarkable. I kept waiting for some obvious test to materialize, some challenge I would recognize and could prepare for. Nothing happened. Rebecca and I continued dating normally. We had dinner with her parents once a month and they were warm and welcoming. Douglas would ask about my work as a software engineer and seemed genuinely interested in the projects I was developing. Diane would ask about my family and my childhood and listened with the focused attention of someone who actually cared about the answers. I started to relax. I started to think maybe the test was just about showing I could be a consistent, reliable partner over time. I started planning how I would propose to Rebecca once the year was up. I looked at rings online during my lunch breaks. I imagined the look on her face when I asked her to marry me. I was an idiot. The first strange thing happened on a Saturday morning in February. I woke up in my apartment, and my keys were not where I had left them. I always put my keys in the small ceramic bowl by the front door. It was automatic, something I did without thinking every single time I came home. That morning, the bowl was empty. I found my keys on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. I stood there staring at them for a solid minute, trying to remember if I had somehow broken my routine the night before. I couldn't remember doing it. I had come home from Rebecca's place around midnight, hung up my coat, and put my keys in the bowl like always. But clearly I had moved them to the kitchen at some point. I told myself I was just tired and forgot. I made coffee and moved on with my day. 2 weeks later, I found my wallet in the bathroom medicine cabinet. I had been looking for it for 30 minutes, tearing apart my bedroom and living room, convinced I had lost it. It was sitting on the shelf next to my deodorant. I never put my wallet in the bathroom. Never. The disorientation I felt was physical, like the ground had shifted an inch to the left while I wasn't looking. Things started disappearing and reappearing with increasing frequency. My favorite coffee mug would vanish from the cabinet and turn up in my car's cup holder. My laptop charger would move from my desk to inside the bathroom linen closet. My gym shoes ended up in the refrigerator. Each incident was small and explainable on its own. I could be forgetful. I could be stressed from work. I could be moving things while distracted and not remembering. But the cumulative effect was destabilizing. I started questioning my own memory, my own perception of reality. I mentioned it to Rebecca once, laughing about how I seemed to be losing my mind and putting things in bizarre places. She suggested I might be working too hard and should get more sleep. She was probably right, I thought. I started going to bed earlier. The incidents continued. I began leaving notes for myself about where I put important items. I would write down that I placed my keys in the bowl, my wallet on the dresser, my phone on the nightstand. The next morning, none of them would be where my notes said they should be. I stopped mentioning it to anyone because I sounded crazy even to myself. In March, I started noticing that conversations felt off in a way I couldn't articulate. Rebecca would reference things I had supposedly said or done, but I had no memory of saying or doing them. She mentioned that I had told her I didn't like her friend Allison, but I had never said that. I liked Allison fine. Rebecca seemed confused when I contradicted her and said I had definitely told her that during dinner the previous week. I let it go because arguing about it seemed pointless. Then her mother brought up a story I had allegedly shared about my brother getting arrested in college. My brother had never been arrested. When I said this, Diane looked genuinely concerned and said I had told her the whole story in detail at their Christmas party. She asked if I was feeling all right. I felt my face get hot and apologized, saying I must have been confusing my brother with a cousin. I had no cousin with an arrest record either. I started recording conversations on my phone without telling anyone. I would play them back later to make sure I wasn't going insane, to prove to myself that I hadn't said the things people claimed I said. The recordings confirmed I was right. I never mentioned disliking Allison. I never told a story about my brother's arrest. But when I tried to play the recordings for Rebecca to show her the truth, my phone was suddenly out of storage space. The recordings had been automatically deleted. April brought a new layer of confusion. I started receiving messages from people I didn't know. The first one came through LinkedIn from someone claiming to be an old college friend named Nathan Greer. The message said it had been years since we last spoke, and he wanted to catch up over coffee. I had never heard of Nathan Greer. I checked my university alumni directory and found no record of anyone by that name in my graduating class. I ignored the message. Then I got an email from a woman named Lisa Montgomery, who said she was concerned about me and wanted to make sure I was taking care of myself. The email referenced specific details about my life that were accurate, including my recent promotion at work and my relationship with Rebecca. I replied asking how she knew me. She responded with confusion, saying we had met at a professional networking event in January and had exchanged several emails since then. I searched my entire email history. There were no previous emails from Lisa Montgomery. I told Rebecca about the strange messages, and she suggested someone might be trying to scam me or fish for information. That made sense. I started being more careful about my digital security, changing passwords, and enabling two-factor authentication on everything. The messages kept coming from different people, all claiming to know me, all referencing accurate information about my current life. The physical symptoms started in May. I began waking up exhausted no matter how much sleep I got. My muscles ached like I had been exercising heavily, but I hadn't been to the gym in weeks. I found bruises on my arms and legs that I couldn't explain. My doctor, Dr. Raymond Kowalski, ran a full blood panel and physical examination. Everything came back normal. He asked about my stress levels and whether I was experiencing any major life changes. I told him I was just working hard and planning to propose to my girlfriend soon. He suggested I might be dealing with anxiety manifesting as physical symptoms. He recommended I consider seeing a therapist to talk through whatever was causing me stress. I took his advice and made an appointment with a counselor named Dr. Patricia Fung. During our first session, I tried to explain the series of strange occurrences, the objects moving, the phantom conversations, the mysterious messages. As I talked, I could hear how I sounded. I sounded paranoid. I sounded like someone experiencing a psychotic break. Dr. Fung listened patiently and asked thoughtful questions about my family history of mental illness, my substance use, my sleep quality. She never said I was crazy, but I could see it in her eyes. She thought I was having some kind of breakdown. She prescribed anxiety medication and recommended we meet weekly to monitor my symptoms. The breaking point came on a Friday night in June. I was at Rebecca's apartment, and we were watching a movie on her couch. I got up to use the bathroom, and when I came back, Rebecca was on her phone texting someone. She saw me and quickly put the phone down, but not before I glimpsed the contact name on the screen. It said Dad, and the most recent message preview said, "He doesn't suspect anything yet." I felt something cold spread through my chest. I sat back down next to Rebecca and tried to keep my voice casual when I asked who she was texting. She said it was just her mother making plans for Sunday brunch. I had seen the screen. It wasn't her mother. It was her father, and the message wasn't about brunch. I waited until Rebecca went to the bathroom, and then I grabbed her phone from the coffee table. My hands were shaking as I opened it. I knew her passcode because we had shared them months ago in that trusting way couples do. The message thread with her father was gone, completely erased. I scrolled through her entire message history, and there was nothing from her father since 2 weeks prior, just a brief exchange about borrowing a ladder. I put the phone back exactly where it had been and sat on that couch, feeling my reality crack down the middle like dropped glass. That night, after Rebecca fell asleep, I drove back to my apartment in a daze. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes just trying to breathe normally. When I finally went inside, I noticed immediately that something was different. The air smelled wrong, like someone had been there while I was gone. I walked through each room slowly, looking for what had changed. Everything appeared normal, but I felt it in my bones, that sense of intrusion, of violation. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out a shoebox where I kept old photographs and letters. Inside the box was a small digital voice recorder I had purchased weeks ago but hadn't used yet. I had put it in the box for safekeeping. Now it was sitting on top of the photos instead of underneath them where I had placed it. I picked it up and saw that it had been turned on. The record light was glowing faintly red. Someone had activated it and put it back in the box. I pressed play and heard my own voice. I was talking to someone on the phone about Rebecca, saying how much I loved her and wanted to propose soon. The recording was from earlier that evening when I had called my mother from my car before heading to Rebecca's place. Someone had recorded my private phone conversation. I started searching my apartment with frantic energy. I looked in every drawer, behind every picture frame, inside every light fixture. I found them everywhere. Tiny cameras no bigger than a shirt button. Audio recording devices tucked into smoke detectors and electrical outlets. My entire apartment had been surveilled. I counted 14 separate devices before I stopped looking because I couldn't handle finding more. I sat on my kitchen floor at 3 a.m, surrounded by the tiny pieces of surveillance equipment I had pulled from my walls, and I finally understood. The test. This was the test. Rebecca's parents had been watching me, listening to me, manipulating me for months. The moved objects, the phantom conversations, the mysterious messages, all of it was designed to destabilize me, to see how I would react under psychological pressure. The bruises were probably from someone coming into my apartment while I was drugged or deeply asleep and moving my body to test how completely unconscious I was. The exhaustion was likely from medications they were somehow introducing into my food or drinks. Everything was controlled. Everything was monitored. I was a rat in a maze designed by Douglas and Diane Whitmore, and Rebecca had known about it the entire time. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't sleep knowing they might be watching me right now through cameras I hadn't found yet. As soon as it was a reasonable hour, I called a lawyer. The first 3 lawyers I tried told me that, unless I had proof of illegal activity, there wasn't much they could do about my girlfriend's parents being controlling. The 4th lawyer, a woman named Jennifer Albright who specialized in privacy law and domestic surveillance, listened to my entire story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said this wasn't the first time she had heard about something like this. She said there was a pattern of wealthy families using psychological testing on potential in-laws, and it existed in a legal gray area because the victims technically consented to being evaluated. She asked if I had signed anything. I thought back to that first conversation in the Whitmore backyard and realized Douglas had never actually told me the specific methods of the test. He had just said I would be evaluated discreetly. I had agreed to be assessed. I hadn't agreed to be surveilled in my own home. But could I prove that distinction in court? Jennifer Albright told me to document everything immediately. She said to photograph every surveillance device I found, to save every strange message I received, to keep a detailed journal of every incident of moved objects or phantom conversations. She said if I could prove the Whitmores had broken laws in their testing methods, I might have grounds for legal action. More importantly, she said I needed to protect myself immediately. She recommended I find a new place to stay, somewhere the Whitmores didn't know about, and not tell Rebecca where I was going. She said based on the extent of the surveillance I had described, I was potentially in danger. People who went to these lengths to control someone's environment didn't react well when that control was threatened. I thanked her and hung up and started packing a bag with shaking hands. I took only essential items and left most of my belongings behind. I checked into a motel on the other side of the city using cash and a fake name. I turned off my phone and removed the battery. I sat on the scratchy polyester bedspread in that anonymous room and tried to figure out what to do next. Rebecca started calling me around noon. I watched my phone light up with her name over and over. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that progressed from concerned to confused to angry. In the last one, her voice had an edge I had never heard before. She said I was being childish, and she deserved an explanation for why I was ignoring her. She said her parents were worried about me and wanted to help. She said if I didn't call her back by the end of the day, she was going to assume we were done. I saved every voicemail. Around 6 p.m, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Douglas Whitmore. His voice was calm and measured like he was talking to a spooked horse. He said Rebecca had told him I was upset about something, and he wanted to clear the air. He said if I had concerns about the evaluation process, we could discuss them like adults. He said there had obviously been some misunderstanding about the scope and methods of the test. He suggested we meet in person to talk through everything. I asked him if he had installed cameras in my apartment. There was a pause. Then he said that sometimes the evaluation required observational components, but everything had been done with proper legal consultation. He said I had consented to being assessed, and the assessment included monitoring my behavior in private settings to ensure authenticity. I told him that was illegal surveillance. He laughed, actually laughed, and said I would find that the law was more complicated than I thought when it came to consensual evaluation processes. I hung up and immediately called Jennifer Albright. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the tension in her voice before I even finished explaining the call. She said Douglas Whitmore's admission about the surveillance was crucial, but I needed more. She said one phone call wouldn't be enough to build a case. She asked if I was willing to wear a wire and meet with him in person to get a recorded confession. The thought of sitting across from Douglas Whitmore and pretending to be calm while he explained how he had violated me made my stomach turn. But I said yes, because I needed him to face consequences. I needed Rebecca to face consequences. I needed everyone who had participated in this to understand that what they did was not okay. Jennifer connected me with a private investigator named Gordon Fletcher, who had 20 years of experience in corporate espionage cases. Gordon met me at the motel that night with recording equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. He showed me how to wear the device under my shirt and how to activate it without being obvious. He coached me on how to ask questions that would elicit clear admissions of guilt. He told me to stay calm no matter what Douglas said, and to keep him talking as long as possible. I practiced my responses until my voice stopped shaking. The meeting was set for a Sunday morning at a cafe downtown, neutral territory where I could feel safer than in the Whitmore house. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the back with clear sight lines to all exits. Gordon was sitting 3 tables away pretending to read a newspaper, back up in case things went wrong. Douglas walked in exactly on time, wearing expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than my car payment. He sat down across from me with that same expensive smile and ordered a coffee. Like this was a friendly chat between future family members. He started by apologizing for any distress the evaluation process had caused me. He said the purpose was never to harm me, but to ensure I was truly suited to be part of their family. He said Rebecca's happiness was their top priority, and they needed to be certain I could handle the pressures that came with their lifestyle. I asked him to explain exactly what the evaluation had involved. He seemed pleased by the question, like I was finally being reasonable. He described the surveillance as comprehensive behavioral assessment. He said they had monitored my apartment, my car, my workplace, my digital communications. He said they had created stress scenarios to observe my reactions, including the moved objects and the phantom social connections. He said they had consulted with psychologists and surveillance experts to design a test that would reveal my true character under pressure. I felt my jaw clench and had to consciously relax it. I asked him if he thought it was ethical to drug me. Douglas's smile flickered for just a second. He said they had never drugged me, but they had tested my sleep cycles and physical vulnerability to assess whether I posed any security risks to their daughter. He said they needed to know if I could be trusted in all circumstances, including when I was unconscious or compromised. I asked what would have happened if I had failed the test. He said it was fortunate I hadn't failed, because the consequences would have been unfortunate for my career and my reputation. He said they had compiled extensive documentation of my behavior over the past year, and they would have used that documentation to ensure I stayed away from Rebecca permanently. He said this was just how their family protected itself, and I should be grateful they had decided I passed. The recording device under my shirt was capturing every word. I asked him one final question. I asked if Rebecca had been part of planning the test, or if she had just gone along with it. Douglas looked genuinely proud when he answered. He said Rebecca had been an essential part of the evaluation team, providing insider perspective on my vulnerabilities and weaknesses. He said she had done an excellent job of maintaining her role while helping them gather the information they needed. I walked out of that cafe with a year's worth of rage compressed into a space behind my ribs that felt like it might explode. I met Gordon at his car 2 blocks away and handed him the recording equipment. He listened to the entire conversation through headphones while I sat in the passenger seat staring at nothing. When it finished, he looked at me and said, what Douglas Whitmore had just described met the definition of several different crimes, including illegal surveillance, stalking, harassment, and potentially criminal conspiracy. He said I had enough evidence now to go to the police and pursue charges. He also said I should prepare myself for the fact that people like the Whitmores had expensive lawyers and prosecuting them would be a long, difficult fight. I told him I didn't care how long it took or how hard it was. I wanted them to face consequences. Gordon nodded and said he would help me every step of the way. We drove directly to the Metropolitan Police Department and asked to speak with someone who handled technology crimes and stalking cases. Detective Luis Ramirez met us in an interview room and listened to my story with an expression that shifted from skeptical to disturbed. I played him the recording of Douglas's confession. I showed him photographs of the surveillance devices I had found in my apartment. I provided my journal documenting every strange incident over the past 10 months. I gave him the contact information for Dr. Kowalski and Dr. Fung, who could confirm I had sought medical and psychological help for symptoms I now understood were caused by the Whitmore's testing. Detective Ramirez took notes and asked detailed questions about timelines and specific incidents. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said this was one of the most comprehensive cases of illegal surveillance he had encountered outside of corporate espionage. He said based on the evidence I had provided, he had probable cause to seek warrants for Douglas and Diane Whitmore's home, computers, and phone records. He said the investigation would take time, but he was committed to pursuing charges. He asked if I was prepared for the reality that Rebecca would likely face legal consequences as well if she had participated in the conspiracy as actively as Douglas claimed. I said yes. I said I wanted everyone involved held accountable. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and evidence collection. Detective Ramirez executed search warrants on the Whitmore residence and found exactly what he expected to find. They had an entire room in their basement set up as a surveillance center with monitors displaying live feeds from my apartment, my car, and several other locations I frequented. They had files on me that included psychological profiles, daily behavior logs, and transcripts of my private conversations going back 13 months. They had similar files on 4 other young men who had apparently dated Rebecca over the past 8 years. Each file documented a year-long evaluation process identical to what I had experienced. Each file ended with an assessment rating. 3 of the men had been rated as unsuitable, and their files contained evidence of systematic harassment campaigns designed to drive them away from Rebecca. One previous boyfriend had been hospitalized for a mental breakdown after experiencing what the files described as an intensive phase of psychological pressure testing. The files referred to this phase as the Crisis Escalation Protocol, designed to see if the subject would maintain emotional stability under extreme manufactured stress. Jennifer Albright filed a civil lawsuit on my behalf against Douglas, Diane, and Rebecca Whitmore, seeking damages for emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional harm. The lawsuit became public record, and within days, reporters started contacting me for interviews. The local news ran a story about the wealthy family accused of running psychological torture experiments on their daughter's boyfriends. The story went viral. Suddenly everyone had an opinion about the case. Some people thought I was exaggerating normal family vetting processes. Others were horrified by the surveillance and manipulation. Rebecca's friends from her private school circled the wagons and started a social media campaign claiming I was a bitter ex-boyfriend trying to destroy her family's reputation. My phone number got leaked somehow, and I started receiving threatening messages from strangers who thought I was attacking a nice family for no reason. I had to change my number twice. I had to move again because people figured out where I was staying and showed up outside my motel room demanding interviews. The preliminary hearing happened in August. Douglas and Diane Whitmore arrived at the courthouse looking like they were attending a garden party, calm and put together and radiating expensive legal confidence. Their attorney was a man named Richard Thornhill, who had a reputation for defending wealthy clients accused of white-collar crimes. He argued that my case was a gross mischaracterization of a family's reasonable desire to ensure their daughter's partner met certain standards. He claimed I had consented to evaluation and was now experiencing buyer's remorse about subjecting myself to scrutiny. He tried to paint me as someone who had gladly participated in the process until I realized I might fail, then attempted to destroy the family's reputation out of spite. The prosecution presented the surveillance footage, the files, the documented harassment of previous boyfriends, and the recording of Douglas admitting to everything. The judge, a stern woman named Magistrate Karen Delacroix, listened to both sides and then announced she was granting the prosecution's request to move forward with criminal charges. She said the evidence suggested a pattern of predatory behavior that warranted a full trial. Douglas's lawyer objected strenuously, but the magistrate was unmoved. Rebecca tried to contact me once during this period. She sent a letter to my lawyer's office, since I had blocked all her direct contact methods. Jennifer forwarded it to me with a note saying I had no obligation to read it if I didn't want to. I read it anyway, some masochistic part of me needing to know what she would say. The letter was 3 pages of justifications and blame-shifting. Rebecca wrote that she had thought she was helping me by participating in the evaluation. She said her parents had convinced her that testing potential spouses was a form of love, a way to ensure only the strongest relationships survived. She said she had started to have doubts about the process around month 7 when she saw how exhausted and paranoid I was becoming, but her parents assured her that I was handling everything fine, and the stress was a necessary part of proving my commitment. She said she had wanted to tell me the truth so many times, but her parents made it clear that breaking protocol would invalidate the entire test, and I would fail by default. She wrote that she loved me, and she was sorry I couldn't see that everything they did came from a place of caring. She asked if there was any possibility we could work through this together. I threw the letter away without responding. The trial was set for October. In the months leading up to it, more victims came forward. 2 of the previous boyfriends whose files had been found in the Whitmore basement contacted Detective Ramirez and provided additional testimony about their experiences. One of them, a man named Gregory Walsh, described being followed by private investigators, having his employer contacted with false allegations about his character, and experiencing a systematic campaign to destroy his professional reputation after he broke up with Rebecca. The other, a software developer named Kevin Zhao, described an evaluation process nearly identical to mine, including surveillance, moved objects, and manufactured social scenarios designed to test his reactions. Both men had thought they were going crazy during their relationships with Rebecca. Both men had sought psychological help for symptoms that disappeared once they ended contact with the Whitmore family. Their testimony established a clear pattern of predatory behavior spanning nearly a decade. The prosecution built a case around conspiracy to commit stalking, illegal surveillance, harassment, and reckless endangerment based on the documented mental health crises their testing had caused. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I had to sit in that courtroom and listen to Douglas Whitmore's attorney argue that everything they had done fell within the bounds of reasonable family protection. I had to hear Diane Whitmore testify that she believed they were helping young men become better partners through rigorous character evaluation. I had to watch Rebecca cry on the witness stand as she claimed she had been manipulated by her parents into participating in something she didn't fully understand. The prosecution systematically dismantled each defense. They presented the surveillance footage showing me in my own apartment, unaware I was being watched in my most private moments. They played recordings of conversations between Douglas and Diane, discussing which stress scenarios to deploy next and how to increase psychological pressure without leaving evidence of direct interference. They brought in Dr. Fung, who testified that my anxiety symptoms had been consistent with someone experiencing sustained psychological trauma and environmental manipulation. They presented evidence that one of the previous boyfriends had attempted suicide after his evaluation period ended, and the Whitmores had initiated their unsuitable partner removal protocol. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict in a steady voice that seemed too calm for the magnitude of what she was saying. Douglas Whitmore was found guilty on 11 counts, including conspiracy to commit stalking, illegal surveillance, and criminal harassment. Diane Whitmore was found guilty on 9 counts. Rebecca Whitmore was found guilty on 4 counts, as an accessory to illegal surveillance and conspiracy to commit harassment. The courtroom erupted in noise. Douglas sat perfectly still like he had been carved from stone. Diane started crying. Rebecca looked at me across the room and I couldn't read her expression. It was somewhere between devastation and defiance. I felt nothing. I had expected to feel satisfaction or vindication when this moment came, but instead, I just felt empty and tired. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later and dismissed everyone. I walked out of that courthouse into a crowd of reporters and camera crews all shouting questions. Jennifer Albright guided me through them without letting me stop to answer. We got into her car and sat in the parking garage in silence for several minutes before either of us could speak. Sentencing happened on a cold morning in December. Douglas Whitmore received 4 years in federal prison and a fine of $500,000. Diane Whitmore received 2 years and a fine of $200,000. Rebecca Whitmore received 18 months probation, mandatory psychological counseling, and a restraining order preventing her from contacting me or any of the other victims. The judge gave a statement saying the sentences reflected the serious and calculated nature of the crimes and the severe harm inflicted on multiple victims over many years. She said the Whitmores had weaponized their wealth and resources to torture people psychologically, and they needed to face meaningful consequences. Douglas's lawyer immediately filed an appeal. I didn't care. The criminal trial was over. The civil lawsuit was still pending, but Jennifer said based on the criminal convictions, we would almost certainly win damages. She estimated I could receive between $800,000 and $1.2 million in compensation for the emotional distress and invasion of privacy. The money didn't matter much to me. I would have paid twice that amount to never have gone through any of this. 3 months after the sentencing, I was sitting in my new apartment in a different city, starting over for the 3rd time in a year. I had left my job and moved somewhere the Whitmores didn't know about. Somewhere I could try to rebuild my life without looking over my shoulder. The apartment was small, but it was mine, and I knew for certain there were no cameras hidden in the walls because I had hired a professional sweep team to check every inch before I moved in. I was seeing a new therapist, Dr. Michael Rivera, who specialized in treating victims of psychological trauma and stalking. We were working through the layers of violation and trust issues that came from having your entire reality manipulated for months. He said recovery would take time, but I was making good progress. I had started to sleep through the night again without waking up convinced someone was in my apartment. I had stopped checking my belongings compulsively to make sure they hadn't been moved. Small victories that felt enormous. I got a message through Jennifer Albright from one of the other victims, Kevin Zhao. He wanted to know if I would be interested in starting a support network for people who had experienced similar psychological abuse from intimate partners or their families. He said his therapist had suggested that talking with others who understood the specific horror of having your environment weaponized against you might be helpful. I said yes. We started meeting monthly, a small group of 5 men who had all dated Rebecca Whitmore or been targeted by families running similar control operations. Gordon Fletcher attended our meetings sometimes and shared information about other cases he had encountered involving wealthy families using surveillance and psychological manipulation to vet potential in-laws. He said it was more common than people realized, existing in a shadowy space between legal family background checks and illegal harassment. Most victims never came forward because they convinced themselves they were crazy or because they didn't have the resources to fight back against wealthy, well-connected families. Our group started documenting patterns and sharing information with authorities and journalists who were investigating these practices. We became a resource for other victims trying to understand if what they experienced was criminal abuse or just overbearing in-laws. The civil lawsuit settled out of court in April. The Whitmores agreed to pay me $950,000 in damages and to publicly acknowledge that their evaluation process violated my rights and caused me severe emotional harm. They also agreed to never conduct similar evaluations in the future and to destroy all files and surveillance footage they had collected on me and the other victims. Jennifer negotiated the settlement with their attorneys over the course of several weeks. She told me they were desperate to avoid another public trial that would bring more attention to their crimes. I accepted the settlement not because I needed the money, but because I needed the acknowledgement. I needed them to admit in writing that what they did was wrong. The settlement was finalized on a Wednesday afternoon, and Jennifer called me with the news. I hung up the phone and sat in my apartment, feeling that same empty tiredness I had felt when the verdict was read. This was over. It was finally over. I had won. So why did I still feel broken? Dr. Rivera told me that winning a legal case doesn't erase trauma. He said justice and healing were separate processes that sometimes overlapped, but often didn't. He said I had achieved justice through the court system, but healing would require different work, internal work that had nothing to do with lawsuits or settlements. We started focusing on rebuilding my sense of safety in the world, relearning how to trust my own perceptions, processing the grief of losing a relationship I had thought was real. He helped me understand that Rebecca had been both a victim and a perpetrator, shaped by her parents' twisted worldview, but still responsible for her own choices. He helped me understand that I could acknowledge the complexity of the situation while still maintaining boundaries and refusing contact with anyone from that family. Slowly, incrementally, I started to feel like myself again. Not the person I was before I met Rebecca. That person was gone. But someone new who understood the darker corners of human behavior and had survived walking through them. A year after the trial ended, I was approached by a journalist named Olivia Chen who was writing a book about psychological abuse in intimate relationships and wanted to include my story. I initially said no because I wanted to move on and leave everything behind. But she convinced me that telling my story publicly might help other people recognize the warning signs before they got as deep as I did. I agreed to be interviewed on the condition that I could review anything she wrote about me before publication. We met several times over the following months, and I walked her through the entire timeline of my relationship with Rebecca and the evaluation process. Olivia was thorough and compassionate, and she made me feel like my experience mattered beyond just being a cautionary tale. Her book was published the following spring, with a chapter dedicated to my case titled The Test. She sent me an advance copy, and I read it alone in my apartment with my hands shaking the same way they had shaken in Detective Ramirez's office when I first saw the surveillance photos. The book generated new media attention to the case. Several major news outlets ran stories about the Whitmore family and the broader phenomenon of wealthy families using surveillance and psychological testing on potential in-laws. A documentary production company reached out wanting to make a film about my experience. I declined. I had given my story to Olivia's book, and that felt like enough. I didn't want to relive everything again on camera for entertainment value. Some of the other victims agreed to participate in the documentary, and I supported their decision while maintaining my own boundaries. The documentary was released 2 years after the trial and won several awards for investigative journalism. It featured interviews with Douglas and Diane Whitmore conducted in prison, where they maintained they had only wanted to protect their daughter. It showed clips from my testimony at trial, but respected my wish not to appear on camera. The documentary helped change legislation in 3 states regarding stalking laws and surveillance crimes, making it easier to prosecute cases involving family members and romantic partners. I started dating again 3 years after everything ended. It was terrifying. Every new relationship brought waves of anxiety about hidden motives and secret tests. I had to learn how to trust again, how to accept that not everyone had ulterior motives, how to recognize that healthy love didn't require proving myself through trials. My new girlfriend, a high school teacher named Amanda, was patient with my baggage and my hypervigilance about privacy. I told her about the Whitmore case on our 4th date because I needed her to understand why I had certain boundaries and triggers. She listened without judgment and then asked what she could do to help me feel safe. That simple question made me realize I had found someone fundamentally different from Rebecca. Someone who saw my trauma and wanted to support me instead of exploit my vulnerabilities. We took things slowly. We built trust, gradually. When she met my family for the first time, there was no test, no evaluation period, no hidden cameras, just normal relationship progression with all its awkwardness and authenticity. I think about Douglas sitting in his prison cell sometimes and wonder if he understands what he did wrong. I think about Diane and whether she truly believed they were helping people by torturing them. I think about Rebecca and the life she might have had if her parents hadn't raised her to see relationships as experiments. Mostly, I think about the version of myself who sat in that backyard 18 months into dating Rebecca and said yes to being evaluated. I wish I could go back and tell him to run. I wish I could show him the surveillance photos and the trial transcripts and the settlement documents and say, this is what happens when you agree to prove your worth to people who see you as a subject instead of a person. But I can't go back. All I can do is move forward with the knowledge I earned through pain and violation and legal battles. All I can do is tell my story so that maybe someone else will recognize the warning signs before they lose a year of their life to someone else's twisted idea of love. The civil settlement money sits in my bank account mostly untouched. I donated a significant portion to organizations that support victims of stalking and psychological abuse. I used some to pay off my student loans and buy a modest house in my new city. The rest stays there as a reminder that I fought back and won, that I didn't let the Whitmores break me permanently, even though they tried. Amanda and I got engaged last month. There was no test. Her parents are normal people who welcomed me into their family with warmth and acceptance. When I asked her to marry me, it was just us on a quiet beach at sunset. No hidden cameras, no evaluation criteria, just two people choosing each other freely. She said yes, and I cried because I never thought I would get to have this. A relationship built on honesty and trust, instead of manipulation and surveillance. We're planning a small wedding for next fall. Rebecca sent a card to my lawyer's office congratulating me on the engagement. Jennifer forwarded it with a note saying I didn't need to respond. I threw the card away without reading whatever message she had written inside. Some doors need to stay closed. Some people don't deserve access to your happiness. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it completely. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.